My name is Warren and I am 56 years old. I was sitting in a French restaurant across from my son and his beautiful fiancée from Paris. She smiled at me warmly, speaking perfect English with a charming accent. But when she turned to her parents and switched to French, she had no idea I understood every single word. She called me an ugly cow. She talked about green cards and inheritance, and I just smiled politely through the entire dinner. Have you ever been in a room where people thought you could not understand them? Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from, and if you have not already, please subscribe. Trust me, you do not want to miss how this dinner ended. Let me take you back to where it all began. Because to understand why that dinner mattered so much, you need to know who I am and how I came to speak French in the first place. I was born in 1969 in a small town in Vermont. My father was a carpenter who built furniture with his bare hands, and my mother worked as a nurse at the local hospital. We were not rich by any stretch of the imagination, but we had enough. There was always food on the table, a warm house in the winter, and parents who loved me even when they were exhausted from long shifts and hard labor. When I was 12 years old, something happened that would change the trajectory of my entire life, though I did not know it at the time. My uncle gave me a book for my birthday. It was a worn paperback copy of The Count of Monte Cristo translated into English. I remember staying up late under my blanket with a flashlight, completely absorbed in the story of Edmond Dantes and his quest for justice, the betrayal, the patience, the ultimate triumph. It spoke to something deep inside me. After finishing the book, I became obsessed with reading it in its original language. I wanted to experience the words exactly as Alexandre Dumas had written them. So I started teaching myself French from books I borrowed from the public library. Grammar textbooks, dictionaries, children's stories in French. I consumed everything I could find. My high school had a French teacher named Mrs. Margaret. She was around 45 years old with gray streaks in her hair and reading glasses that always hung from a chain around her neck. One day, she noticed me struggling through a French novel during lunch break. Instead of walking past, she sat down next to me and asked what I was reading. When I told her about my dream to read Dumas in the original French, her eyes lit up. From that day forward, she offered to tutor me after school completely free of charge. For 3 years, Mrs. Margaret and I met twice a week in her empty classroom. She corrected my pronunciation, explained the subtleties of grammar, and introduced me to French cinema and music. By the time I graduated high school, I could hold a conversation in French with reasonable fluency. College opened even more doors. I received a scholarship to study comparative literature, and in my junior year, I was selected for a study abroad program at the Sorbonne in Paris. It was 1990 and I was 21 years old, stepping off a plane into a city that would forever hold a piece of my heart. The program arranged for students to live with local families to improve their language skills. I was placed with the Moreau family in the 15th arrondissement. Jacques Moreau was a retired accountant with a gentle demeanor and an encyclopedic knowledge of French history. His wife Colette was a former schoolteacher who insisted on correcting my French at every meal, always with a warm smile that took the sting out of her critiques. They treated me like a son. Sunday dinners with their extended family, trips to the countryside, long conversations about philosophy and art over bottles of wine that cost less than $5 but tasted like heaven. By the end of that year, I spoke French like a Parisian. The accent, the slang, the subtle differences between formal and informal speech. It had all become second nature. Returning to America was bittersweet. I finished my degree but ended up pursuing a career in construction engineering rather than literature. Life has a way of taking unexpected turns. I needed stable income, and the construction industry was booming. My French became a private pleasure rather than a professional skill. I read French novels in the evenings, watched French films on weekends, and occasionally spoke to myself in French when I was alone, just to keep the language alive in my mind. Very few people knew about this part of me. My colleagues at work had no idea. My friends from this neighborhood assumed I was just a regular American guy who liked football and barbecues. Even my son Brandon, who was born in 1997, grew up without knowing his father was fluent in French. He knew I liked books and that I sometimes watched foreign films, but he never connected the dots. There was one person who knew, my ex-wife Sandra. We met in college, married young, and had Brandon when we were both 28, but our marriage did not survive the challenges of raising a child while building careers. She left when Brandon was 13, running off with a man she met at her office. The divorce was painful, but I threw myself into being the best single father I could be. For 15 years, I raised Brandon on my own. I coached his little league team, helped him with homework, attended every school event. I worked long hours to pay for his college education, sacrificing vacations and luxuries so he could graduate debt-free. When he landed a job at a financial firm in New York City, I felt a pride that words cannot adequately describe. Our relationship was good, but distance and busy schedules meant we did not see each other as often as I would have liked. Brandon called every few weeks, sent photos occasionally, and came home for major holidays. It was the normal pattern for an adult child building his own life, but I would be lying if I said I did not feel lonely sometimes. Then, about 6 months before that fateful dinner, Brandon called with exciting news. He had met someone special, a French woman named Celine who worked in the fashion industry in New York. He sounded happier than I had heard him in years, gushing about how beautiful she was, how sophisticated, how different from any woman he had ever dated. I was thrilled for him. After the heartbreak of watching his mother leave, Brandon had always been cautious in relationships. To hear him so enthusiastic about someone gave me hope that he had finally found the right person. He promised to bring her home to meet me soon. And as I hung up the phone that day, I had no idea that my hidden knowledge of French would soon become the most important weapon in my arsenal. About a month before the dinner that would change everything, Brandon arranged a video call so I could meet Celine for the first time. I remember sitting in my living room adjusting my laptop camera, feeling nervous, like I was the one being evaluated rather than the other way around. When the call connected, I saw my son sitting next to one of the most beautiful women I had ever seen. Celine was 26 years old, with long chestnut brown hair that fell past her shoulders and striking green eyes that seemed to sparkle even through the pixelated video feed. Her smile was warm, her English accented but excellent, and she immediately called me her future father-in-law with a sweetness that should have made me feel welcomed. And yet something felt off. I could not put my finger on it at the time. There was something in her eyes, a calculating quality that flickered for just a moment when she thought I was not looking directly at her. I dismissed it as paranoia. Perhaps I was being an overprotective father looking for problems where none existed. Celine told me about her work in fashion, how she had moved to New York 3 years ago to pursue opportunities in the American market. She spoke about her parents back in Paris, describing them as small business owners who supported her dreams. Everything she said was perfectly pleasant, perfectly charming. When the call ended, Brandon texted me asking what I thought. I replied that she seemed lovely, and I meant it. I wanted to believe my son had found someone worthy of his love. 2 weeks later, Brandon called with more news. Celine's parents were coming to visit from Paris, and he wanted to arrange a dinner where both families could meet. He had already made reservations at a high-end French restaurant in Boston called Le Petit Chateau, knowing it would make Celine's family feel comfortable. He asked if I could drive down from my home in the suburbs to join them. I agreed immediately. What father would not want to meet the family of his future daughter-in-law? In the days leading up to the dinner, I debated whether to reveal my French abilities. Part of me thought it would be a nice surprise, a way to connect with Celine's parents and show that I appreciated their culture. But another part of me, the cautious part that had been honed by years of dealing with contractors and clients who did not always tell the truth, suggested I keep it hidden. I decided to stay quiet. If Celine and her family were genuine, it would not matter. But if they were not, well, people often reveal their true selves when they think no one is listening. The night of the dinner, I put on my best suit, navy blue, recently dry cleaned, paired with a silver tie that Brandon had given me for Father's Day years ago. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a man who was nervous but hopeful. I wanted this to go well. I wanted my son to have the happy ending he deserved. I arrived at Le Petit Chateau 15 minutes early. The restaurant was elegant without being pretentious, with white tablecloth, soft lighting, and the gentle murmur of French being spoken at several tables. I was seated at a round table in a semi-private corner, perfect for a family gathering. Brandon and Celine arrived first. She looked stunning in a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill, her hair styled in loose waves, diamonds glittering at her ears. She embraced me warmly, kissing both my cheeks in the French style. "Your home is so close," she said in her accented English. "Brandon told me you live in a lovely area." I thanked her and made small talk, waiting for her parents to arrive. They came through the door about 10 minutes later. Jean-Pierre Beaumont was 58 years old, tall and thin, with silver hair swept back from a high forehead. He had the bearing of a man who considered himself important, his chin slightly elevated as he surveyed the restaurant. Margot Beaumont was 55, her face heavily made up, expensive jewelry dripping from her neck and wrists. She looked around the room with an expression that suggested nothing quite met her standards. Celine rushed to greet them, switching immediately to rapid French. I watched as they exchanged kisses and whispered words, then turned to approach our table. Jean-Pierre's English was limited, heavily accented, and grammatically shaky. Margot barely spoke any at all, responding to my greetings with tight smiles and monosyllabic answers. Celine positioned herself as the translator, smoothly converting between languages. What no one at that table knew was that I understood every word being spoken, every single one. The first hint of trouble came when I excused myself to use the restroom before the appetizers arrived. I was gone for perhaps 3 minutes, but when I returned, walking quietly in my soft-soled dress shoes, I paused behind a decorative pillar just within earshot of our table. Celine was speaking to her parents in French, her voice low but clear. "He looks older than I expected," she said. "The house is probably not worth much either." Jean-Pierre responded. "How much money does Brandon have?" Celine glanced toward the restroom to make sure I was not returning, then continued. "He just got promoted. His salary is around $120,000 a year now. And when the old man dies, Brandon inherits everything." Margot nodded approvingly. That should be enough. I stood frozen behind that pillar, my heart pounding in my chest. Had I heard correctly? Was this beautiful woman really discussing my death and my son's inheritance, like items on a shopping list? I forced myself to breathe normally and walked back to the table, my face arranged in a pleasant expression that revealed nothing. I sat down, smiled at everyone, and picked up my menu. The appetizers arrived shortly after. But my appetite had vanished entirely. The waiter placed the foie gras and French onion soup before us with practiced elegance. Under normal circumstances, I would have savored every bite. Le Petit Chateau was known for its authentic cuisine, and the aroma rising from the dishes was extraordinary. But my stomach had turned to stone. I complimented the food in English, making small talk about the restaurant's reputation, and how pleased I was that Brandon had chosen such a fine establishment. Celine translated for her parents, but I noticed she added something extra. "He probably never had real French food before," she said in French, her tone dripping with condescension. "Look at how he holds his knife and fork." Margot snickered quietly. "Americans, they only know how to eat hamburgers." I continued eating as if I had heard nothing, carefully cutting my foie gras with perfect technique. The irony was not lost on me. I had learned proper French dining etiquette from the Moreau family decades ago. Colette had been particularly strict about table manners, insisting that I learn how to hold silverware, when to place my napkin, which bread plate belonged to me. These people assumed I was an ignorant American, when in reality I probably knew more about French dining customs than Celine herself. Brandon, oblivious to the undercurrents at the table, was beaming with happiness. He talked about his work, explaining a recent project that had earned him recognition from his supervisors. His enthusiasm was genuine, his pride evident. Watching him, I felt a mixture of love and heartbreak. My son was so trusting, so eager to believe that the woman beside him loved him as much as he loved her. Celine listened to Brandon with apparent adoration, nodding at the right moments, touching his arm affectionately. But when he turned to ask me a question about my own work, she immediately switched to French with her parents. He just got another raise, she informed them. An extra $30,000 a year. His total salary is now $120,000. Jean-Pierre raised his eyebrows, calculating silently. "Not bad, but not wealthy either." Celine leaned closer to her father. "Patience, Papa, he is climbing the ladder quickly. And when the old man passes away, Brandon will inherit everything." Margot stirred her soup thoughtfully. "The old man looks healthy enough. He could live another 20 years. Celine shrugged. "It does not matter. I will have my green card within 2 years of the marriage. After that, I can file for divorce and take half of everything Brandon has accumulated. Plus, if the father dies within 10 years, Brandon's inheritance becomes marital property. I get half of that too." I listened to this cold calculation while smiling at my son, asking him about his upcoming business trip, pretending to be a proud father, enjoying a pleasant family dinner. Inside, I was screaming. The main course arrived, beef bourguignon, the specialty of the house. The rich aroma of wine-braised beef filled the air, and Brandon made a point of explaining to me how this was Celine's favorite dish, how her mother made it every Sunday when she was growing up in Paris. "Is that true?" I asked Celine in English. genuinely curious if any part of her persona was real. She smiled radiantly. Oh yes, Maman is a wonderful cook. Family dinners were so special when I was a child. I hope we can create the same traditions with our own family someday. The words sounded beautiful, sincere. If I had not heard what she said in French just moments before, I might have believed every syllable. I decided to dig a little deeper. Tell me about your parents' business, I said. Brandon mentioned they are entrepreneurs. Celine launched into a charming story about a small boutique her parents owned in Paris selling antiques and vintage items. She described the shop with loving detail, the way sunlight came through the front windows, the regular customers who had become like family. Jean-Pierre nodded along, understanding enough English to follow the general topic. But when I lowered my head to take a bite of beef, Celine dropped the act. This ugly old cow keeps asking questions, she muttered in French to her mother. But his son is perfect for our purposes. I will marry him, get my green card, then divorce him for his inheritance. Easy as pie. Margot patted her daughter's hand approvingly. You are a smart girl. Americans are stupid and easy to deceive. Jean-Pierre added his own warning. Just do not let anything slip until you have the green card secured. I heard the words ugly old cow with crystal clarity. In French, she had called me cette vieille vache laide. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. This woman sat across from me, smiled at me, kissed my cheeks, and called me an ugly cow when she thought I could not understand. I looked up from my plate and caught Brandon gazing at Celine with pure adoration in his eyes. Dad, isn't she amazing? He said. I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I forced the muscles in my face to form a smile. She seems very charming. Celine leaned over and kissed Brandon's cheek, then turned to her parents and said in French, This idiot trusts me completely. It is almost too easy. Brandon noticed the exchange and asked what they were discussing. Celine lied smoothly. Maman was just saying how handsome you are. She thinks we will make beautiful babies together. Brandon blushed with pleasure. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him to force him to see the truth, but I knew it would not work. He was in love, blinded by it. If I accused Celine without proof he could understand, he would think I was jealous or prejudiced against foreigners. He would defend her, and I would lose him. No. I needed to be strategic. I needed to let them hang themselves with their own words. Dessert was ordered, crème brûlée for everyone. As the waiter walked away, I made my decision. The time for silence was ending, but I had to set the stage correctly. I excused myself once more, claiming I needed to use the restroom. In reality, I needed a moment to compose myself and finalize my plan. I walked through the restaurant, past the bar with its gleaming bottles, past the kitchen door where delicious smells wafted out and into the men's room. Standing at the sink, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The face staring back at me belonged to a man who had been insulted, degraded, and dismissed, but it also belonged to a man with a weapon his enemies did not know he possessed. I thought about Brandon, about the years I had spent raising him alone, the sacrifices I had made, the dreams I had nurtured for his future. I thought about Sandra abandoning us and how I had sworn to always protect my son from people who would use him. Celine was exactly that kind of person. A user. A manipulator. Someone who saw my son not as a human being worthy of love, but as a means to an end. A green card, an inheritance, a stepping stone to financial security. I could not let this happen. Returning to the table, I adopted a slightly different demeanor. I pretended to have had a bit too much wine, loosening up my speech, becoming more talkative and open than I normally would be. I wanted Celine to think I was lowering my guard. You know, I said, leaning back in my chair, I've been thinking about the future a lot lately. Brandon is my only child, and everything I have will go to him someday. Celine's eyes sharpened almost imperceptibly. She translated for her parents, and I watched Jean-Pierre and Margot exchange glances of interest. I continued playing my part. I've done pretty well for myself over the years. My house is paid off completely, worth about $400,000 in today's market, and I've been saving and investing for decades. Between my retirement accounts and other investments, I've got around $800,000 set aside. The numbers were mostly accurate, perhaps slightly inflated for effect. I wanted to see how they would react. Celine translated quickly, and the reaction was immediate. Margot's eyebrows rose. Jean-Pierre nodded slowly, his earlier dismissive attitude replaced by careful attention. That's very impressive, Celine said in English, her voice warm with what she probably thought sounded like genuine admiration. You must have worked so hard. In French, she told her parents, over $1 million combined, much better than we expected. Jean-Pierre muttered back. This changes things. He is worth keeping around for a while, Margot added, at least until the inheritance is secured. I smiled and shrugged modestly, just tried to be responsible with money. I want Brandon to have security, you know, a foundation to build on. Brandon looked touched by my words. Thanks, Dad. That means a lot. Celine squeezed his hand, then turned to her parents and said in French, when the old man dies, all of this goes to Brandon. And if we are married, half of it becomes mine. We just need to stay married long enough for me to get citizenship, then I can divorce him and take my share. Jean-Pierre asked, what are American divorce laws like? Celine replied confidently. I have researched thoroughly. After 2 years of marriage, I have full rights to half of all marital assets. If I'm clever about it, I can walk away with $600,000 or more, plus any inheritance he receives while we are married. Margot smiled. And if the father dies within 10 years, Celine calculated aloud, then Brandon inherits over $1 million, and I get half of that too when we divorce. Altogether, I could end up with close to $1 million for just a few years of pretending to love this idiot. The casual cruelty in her voice was stunning. She did not see Brandon as a person. She did not see me as a person. We were simply obstacles to be managed, resources to be extracted. I took a sip of wine to hide the fury building in my chest. The dessert arrived, beautiful caramelized custard with a crisp sugar top. I cracked the surface with my spoon and pretended to enjoy it while my mind raced. So I said casually, when are you thinking about having the wedding? Brandon answered eagerly. We're hoping for some time in the next 6 months. Nothing too big, just family and close friends. Celine nodded, playing the role of devoted fiancée. I want something intimate and meaningful. The people we love most in one room. She turned to her parents and said in French, a small wedding saves money. After I have the green card, I will file for divorce and take half of everything. Simple plan. Jean-Pierre asked in French, how long until you can apply for citizenship? Usually 3 years after getting the green card. Celine replied, but I can file for divorce before that. The green card is the important thing. Once I have permanent residency, I do not need Brandon anymore. I had heard enough, more than enough. The question now was not whether to expose them, but how. I needed to do it in a way that would leave no doubt in Brandon's mind, no room for Celine to spin lies or claim misunderstanding. I excused myself one final time. As I walked toward the restroom, I took a detour past the Maitre D's station. Excuse me, I said quietly. I'm going to need the check in about 15 minutes, and please have it brought to me directly. The Maitre D nodded professionally. Of course, sir. I went to the restroom, splashed cold water on my face, and looked at my reflection one more time. This was it. No turning back. I walked back to the table with a new kind of calm. The calm of a man who knows exactly what he needs to do and has accepted the consequences. I returned to my seat and noticed the dynamic at the table had shifted slightly. Celine was leaning close to Brandon, whispering something in his ear that made him laugh. Jean-Pierre was finishing the last of his wine, and Margot was reapplying lipstick using a small compact mirror. For a moment they looked like a normal, happy family, future in-laws bonding over a pleasant dinner. But I knew the truth hidden beneath the surface. I sat down and folded my hands on the table. My movements were deliberate, controlled. I was no longer playing the role of the oblivious American father. Warren, Celine said with her practiced smile, this has been such a wonderful evening. I'm so happy we could all meet. I looked at her directly. Really looked at her. Behind those green eyes, I could see the calculations running, the manipulation machinery working constantly. Yes, I said slowly. It has been very interesting. Something in my tone must have registered because Celine's smile flickered for just a second. Jean-Pierre glanced at me with a hint of concern. Brandon, oblivious as always, jumped in cheerfully. See, I told you Dad would love you guys. This is the start of a great relationship. I turned to my son. My beautiful, trusting, naive son. The boy I had raised, the man I was so proud of. What I was about to do would break his heart, but it would also save his life. Brandon, I said, can I ask you something? Sure, Dad. Anything. Do you speak any French? He laughed. You know I don't. I took Spanish in high school, remember? Why, Celine tensed beside him. I saw her knuckles whiten as she gripped her napkin. Just curious, I said. Because your fiancée and her parents have been having quite an interesting conversation tonight, a conversation they assumed I could not understand. The table went silent. Brandon looked confused. Celine's face drained of color. Jean-Pierre and Margot exchanged panicked glances. "Dad, what are you talking about?" Brandon asked. I turned to face Celine directly. Then, in perfect Parisian French with the accent I had cultivated decades ago, I spoke. "Yes, it was truly very interesting. I particularly appreciated your comments about me, the ugly old cow, and your plans for the green card and inheritance." Celine froze. Completely and utterly froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked like a statue, beautiful and lifeless. Jean-Pierre nearly knocked over his wineglass. Margot's compact clattered to the table. I continued in French, my voice calm but firm. "I learned French when I was 12 years old. I lived in Paris for a year when I was in university. I've understood every single word you have said tonight." Jean-Pierre tried to recover. "You must have misunderstood," he stammered in French. "We were just making casual conversation." I shook my head. "No misunderstanding. Your daughter called me an ugly cow. She said Brandon was perfect for her purposes. She explained her plan to marry him for a green card, then divorce him and take half his assets. She discussed how much she could profit from my death and Brandon's inheritance. I heard all of it." Brandon was looking back and forth between us, his face a mask of confusion and growing alarm. "Dad? What is going on? What did they say?" His voice cracked slightly. I switched to English, keeping my eyes on Celine. "She called me an ugly cow." "Brandon, she told her parents she is only marrying you for a green card. After 2 years, she plans to divorce you and take half of everything you own. She also mentioned hoping I would die soon so you could inherit my money, which would then become hers when she divorces you." Brandon turned to Celine. His face was pale. "Tell me he is making this up." Celine finally found her voice. "Brandon, sweetheart, your father misunderstood. He is exaggerating. You know how protective fathers can be. He is just jealous because another woman is taking you away from him." I leaned forward. "Would you like me to repeat exactly what you said word for word in French? Because I can. Every single sentence. Starting with, when I went to the restroom the first time and you told your parents I looked older than expected and my house probably was not worth much." Celine's face crumbled. She had no defense, no escape. I had heard everything, remembered everything, and could prove it. Brandon stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Several other diners turned to look at the commotion. "Is it true?" he demanded, looking at Jean-Pierre and Margot. His voice was loud enough that nearby tables could hear. Jean-Pierre tried to maintain composure, but his guilty expression betrayed him. Margot was clutching her napkin like a lifeline, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Celine pleaded, reaching for his arm. "Please, let me explain." He pulled away from her touch. "I trusted you. I loved you. I was going to marry you. Brandon, please." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I recognized it immediately. The engagement ring he had shown me over video call months ago. A beautiful solitaire diamond that had cost him 3 months of savings. Without another word, Brandon placed the ring on the table in front of Celine. Then he turned and walked toward the exit. I stood and addressed the table one final time, speaking in French. "Thank you for a memorable evening. I truly enjoyed meeting all of you. J'ai adoré vous rencontrer tous." The irony of the words hung heavy in the air. Jean-Pierre and Margot sat in stunned silence. Celine was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. I placed enough cash on the table to cover the entire dinner, including a generous tip. Then I followed my son out of the restaurant. Brandon was standing in the parking lot, his hands braced against the hood of his car, his shoulders shaking. As I approached, I could hear him crying. I didn't say anything. I simply walked up beside him and put my hand on his back. He turned and collapsed into my arms, sobbing, like he had not done since he was a child. We stood there in that parking lot for a long time, a father holding his heartbroken son under the cold night sky. I drove Brandon back to my house that night. He was in no condition to drive himself, and I didn't want him to be alone. The car ride was mostly silent, broken only by occasional muffled sounds of grief from the passenger seat. When we arrived home, I made coffee and sat with him at the kitchen table. The same table where I had helped him with homework as a child, where we had shared countless meals over the years. How did I not see it? Brandon finally asked, his voice hoarse. She was so good at pretending. I really thought she loved me. I chose my words carefully. You wanted to believe she loved you. That is not a weakness, son. That is what makes you human. He shook his head. I feel like such an idiot. A whole year. I spent a whole year with her. I paid for everything. Her rent, her shopping trips, vacations. And the whole time she was planning to use me. I let him talk. He needed to process this, to let the pain out. Over the next few hours, he told me everything about their relationship, how Celine had approached him at a networking event in Manhattan, how she had been charming and attentive, how she had made him feel special in a way no one else ever had. It became clear that Celine was a skilled manipulator who had targeted Brandon deliberately. She knew he worked in finance, knew he came from a stable family, knew he was the type to fall hard and commit fully. She had played him perfectly. The worst part, Brandon said as dawn began to lighten the sky outside my kitchen window, is that I was going to introduce her to everyone, my friends, my colleagues. I was so proud to have her on my arm, and the whole time she was laughing at me behind my back. Not anymore, I said. You know the truth now. And you learned it before you made a legal commitment that could have cost you everything. He was quiet for a moment. Dad, why did you never tell me you spoke French? Thought about the question. Honestly, I said it was always a private thing for me, a connection to a time in my life that felt separate from everything else. I never imagined it would matter. Brandon managed a weak smile. Well, I'm glad you kept it secret. If she had known, tonight would have gone very differently. He was right about that. If Celine had any idea I understood French, she would have been careful. Her true nature would have remained hidden, possibly until after the wedding, when it would be too late. Over the next few days, Celine tried desperately to reconnect with Brandon. She called his phone repeatedly. He blocked her number. She sent emails, each one a masterpiece of manipulation. She apologized. She blamed her parents for pressuring her. She swore she had real feelings for him underneath the scheming. Brandon showed me some of the messages. I helped him see through the tactics. Every apology was designed to minimize her responsibility. Every excuse pointed the finger at someone else. Nowhere did she take genuine accountability for her cruelty. Jean-Pierre called me once attempting to negotiate. He spoke in broken English, suggesting we could work things out between our families, perhaps some kind of financial arrangement. I responded in French, ensuring he understood every word. There is nothing to discuss. Your family attempted to commit fraud against my son. This conversation is over. Do not contact me or Brandon again. He tried to object, but I hung up the phone. About a week after the dinner, Brandon told me that Celine and her parents had returned to France. He heard through a mutual acquaintance that she was already looking for new prospects in Paris. Apparently, America had become too complicated for her schemes. Good riddance, Brandon said, and I agreed. The healing process took time. Brandon requested 2 weeks of leave from his job and spent the time at my house. We did things we had not done together in years. Fishing at the lake where I taught him to cast when he was 8 years old, working on small repair projects around the house, cooking meals together and eating them on the back porch while watching the sunset. During one of these evenings, Brandon asked me to teach him some French. I started with the basics, pronunciation and simple phrases. He struggled at first, but showed genuine determination. I want to learn, he explained. Not because of Celine, but because it is a part of you I never knew. I want to understand that part of my father. His words touched me deeply. Something beautiful was growing from the ashes of his heartbreak. Our relationship, always good but somewhat distant since he moved to New York, was becoming closer than it had ever been. I also reconnected with the Moreau family in Paris. Jacques and Colette were both still alive, though elderly now. I sent them an email explaining what had happened, and Colette responded with her characteristic warmth and practical wisdom. Not all French people are like that horrible girl, she wrote. Most of us are good people. Please do not let this experience sour your love for our country and culture. I assured her it had not. If anything, it reminded me why I loved France in the first place. The Moreaus represented the best of French hospitality and kindness. Celine and her family were aberrations, con artists who happened to hold French passports. 2 months after the dinner, Brandon returned to New York with a new perspective. He was more cautious now, more thoughtful about the people he let into his life. But he was not bitter. He did not let Celine poison his ability to trust. We spoke on the phone more frequently than before, once a week at minimum, sometimes more. He told me about his work, his friends, his therapy sessions to process the betrayal. I told him about my own life, about the small joys and challenges of retirement that was still a few years away. Then, 6 months after everything fell apart, Brandon called with news. There was someone new. Her name was Sarah, a 27-year-old elementary school teacher he met through a coworker. She was American-born and raised in Ohio with no hidden agendas or secret languages. Dad, Brandon said, laughing on the phone, the first question I asked her was what languages she spoke. She looked at me like I was crazy. I laughed too. What did she say? Just English. And a little bit of Pig Latin from when she was a kid. Perfect, I said. When do I get to meet her? Soon, he promised. And Dad, thank you. For everything. For protecting me. For not giving up on me when I was too blind to see the truth. That is what fathers do, I told him. No matter how old you get, I will always be watching out for you. I meant every word. Looking back on that night at Le Petit Chateau, I realize how close my son came to making the biggest mistake of his life. If I had not kept my French abilities hidden all those years, Celine would have been more careful. If I had not trusted my instincts and stayed quiet when I could have spoken up early, she might have found another way to deceive us. The pain of that evening was real. Hearing myself described as an ugly cow, watching my son be dismissed as an idiot and a target, learning that his love was nothing but a tool in someone else's scheme for financial gain. Those words cut deep, and I would be lying if I said they did not still sting sometimes. But pain has a purpose. It teaches us. It shapes us. It shows us what we are capable of surviving. In the months following the dinner, I started a new chapter of my own life. I began tutoring French online, working with children and young adults who wanted to learn the language I loved so much. Every student reminded me of myself at 12 years old, struggling through grammar books, dreaming of Paris. I found joy in passing on that knowledge and keeping the language alive for another generation. I also let go of my anger towards Celine and her family. Not because they deserved forgiveness, but because carrying that bitterness would only poison my own heart. They were gone from our lives now, their schemes exposed and thwarted. Whatever karma awaited them was not my concern. What mattered was the present, my relationship with Brandon stronger than ever, my own sense of purpose renewed through teaching, the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had protected my son when he needed it most. Sometimes late at night I think about the book that started it all. The Count of Monte Cristo, with its themes of betrayal and justice and the long game of revenge. Edmond Dantes waited years to confront the people who had wronged him, planning every detail with meticulous care. But I am not Edmond Dantes. I did not seek revenge against Celine. I simply revealed the truth and let the consequences unfold naturally. Perhaps that is a different kind of justice, a quieter kind, one that does not require elaborate schemes or dramatic confrontations, just patience and the courage to speak up at the right moment. I never planned to use my French this way. For decades, it was just a private joy, a connection to a culture I loved, a secret garden where I could escape the ordinary world. But that night at the restaurant, it became something else entirely. It became a shield for my son. And maybe that is the real lesson of this whole experience. We never know when the quiet things we nurture in ourselves will become the very things that save the people we love. So now I ask you, what hidden skills or knowledge do you carry that others do not know about? Have you ever been in a situation where a secret ability saved you or someone you care for? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story touched you, please take a moment to hit that like button. It helps more people find these videos. And if you are not already subscribed, go ahead and click that subscribe button so you do not miss future stories. Share this with someone who might need to hear it, a friend who is in a relationship that seems too good to be true, a family member who is about to make a big commitment, or anyone who appreciates a story about a father's love and the power of patience. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the most powerful weapon is simply paying attention when others think you cannot understand. Take care of yourselves and the people you love. Until next time.